My name is Selena Hart. I'm 34 years old, and I thought I understood the meaning of betrayal. Until that night. It was a Monday, hot and dry in Northern California, the kind of day where even the wind felt tired. I had just finished a double shift at the university clinic and was halfway through a cold sandwich when a text lit up my phone. It was from my father. Family dinner, 6 p.m. sharp, no excuses. I sighed and tucked my hair back. Family dinners weren't rare, but the phrasing felt off. Still, I went, out of habit, out of hope. I imagined my mom's garlic roast chicken, the mismatched plates, my younger brother Lucas trying too hard to be funny. I thought maybe things were finally softening again. But the second I walked into the house, I knew something was wrong. There was no smell of food, no hum of the old jazz radio, just silence, and the eerie kind. In the living room, my parents and siblings sat like they were waiting for a verdict to be read. My father stared at me with a look I'd never seen before, cold, distant. My mother's hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. My sister Clara smiled like she was watching a show she'd rehearsed for. "Sit," my father ordered. No hello, no welcome back, just that one word. What followed broke me in ways I can't even describe yet. But before I tell you what they said, what they accused me of, I want to ask you something. If you've ever been judged without a chance to speak, if you've ever been cast out by the very people who were supposed to protect you, then stay with me. Like this video, and subscribe for more true stories that aren't always easy, but always honest. Because what happened that night changed my life. And it was only the beginning. I didn't cry when they told me to leave. I just stared, as if staring hard enough could undo what had just happened. My father, once the man who carried me on his shoulders through thunderstorms, looked at me like a stranger. My mother wouldn't even raise her eyes. And Clara leaned back, arms folded, eyes burning with satisfaction like she'd finally won some invisible war. "You have 1 hour," my brother Lucas said, standing and motioning toward the hallway. "Your bag's packed." I turned my head. There it was, my old duffel bag, fraying at the corners, resting against the cold tile like an afterthought. Inside it was everything I apparently needed now. A toothbrush, 2 shirts, my lab ID, and no trace of the life I'd built for 34 years. No one followed me out. No one called after me. The front door closed behind me with a finality that echoed louder than any scream. In the garage, I caught a glimpse of my father standing by the trash bin. He had just thrown something in. I stepped closer, my legs moving without permission. It was our family photo album, the one with water stains and ink-smudged memories, the one I used to flip through on rainy Sundays. "Seriously?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. He didn't flinch. "Figured you wouldn't need it where you're going." That was the moment it sank in. Not just the betrayal, not just the accusations, but the erasure. They weren't just casting me out, they were erasing me from their story. I got into my car, turned the ignition, and just drove. No destination, no plan, only motion. I didn't know where I was headed, but I knew I couldn't go back. By the time I reached the edge of a small town called Hollow Creek, the sky had turned the color of steel, and my body felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I pulled into a gas station and found an old roadside motel across the street. The room smelled of bleach and old air, but it had a lock. And for now, that was enough. I sat on the cold tile floor, leaning against the bed frame, my phone dark in my hand. No texts, no calls. Just silence. Then I remembered. The crumpled receipt in my wallet, the one from the pharmacy 4 days ago. I pulled it out with shaking fingers. A pregnancy test. I had bought it on a hunch, a strange weight in my stomach, a tightness in my chest, but had been too afraid to know the truth. Now? There was nothing left to lose. 10 minutes later, I stood in the bathroom under flickering fluorescent light. 2 red lines. Positive. No sound escaped me, no scream, no sob, just a whisper. At least, I'm not completely alone. And for the first time that day, I let myself feel something other than betrayal. I placed a hand over my stomach. And I chose to stay standing. I didn't know why I messaged him. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way his name was the only one left in my contacts that didn't taste bitter. Elliot Grant. The man my parents once called a passing phase, a distraction, not one of us. But he had been something else too. Quiet when I needed silence. Present when the world vanished. We hadn't spoken in months. Life had drifted between us like fog over the ocean, slow and unspoken. And yet, when I typed, "We need to talk," I didn't hesitate before hitting send. 3 hours later, a soft knock echoed through the motel room. I opened the door, and there he was, shoulders hunched in an old brown jacket, hair tucked into a slouched beanie, eyes that scanned the room like they already knew the damage. He didn't step in right away. "What did they do to you?" His voice was low, rough, like it had traveled a long road just to reach me. I didn't answer. I handed him the test instead. He took it without flinching. His thumb brushed over the plastic, eyes narrowing, not in shock, not in pity, but in thought. Then he sat down on the bed, elbows on knees like he was grounding himself. "How far along?" 6 weeks, maybe a little more," I whispered. "But Elliot, there's more." I told him everything. The accusations, the silence, the bag in the hallway, and the look in my father's eyes when he threw away that photo album. Elliot didn't interrupt, but his right hand curled slowly into a fist. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy," I said. "I just didn't want to go through this without at least one person knowing I still exist." He let out a breath, then looked at me, really looked at me. "Selena," he said, voice steady, "I never believed them. Not for 1 second. I blinked. I saw the way your brother hijacked your presentation at the Caltech symposium. I saw the slide. Your name, gone. I knew it wasn't his work." "You noticed?" "I notice more than you think," he said gently. "I just thought you'd speak up when you were ready." We sat in silence after that, back against the same wall, shadows long in the dim room. Then he said something I'll never forget. "The only thing scarier than raising a child is walking away from someone who needed you and knowing you could have stayed." I turned to him. "Are you saying—" "I'm staying," he said, eyes soft but firm. "You're not alone." And for the first time since everything fell apart, I let myself believe him. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of the heater groaning faintly through the motel wall. Elliot had left at dawn for a short trip to Monterey, but on the table, he left a cup of coffee and a small handwritten note. "I believe in you, in everything you've done, and everything you're about to do." I read it twice, then folded it gently and tucked it into my wallet. That note sat next to something else, an old photo of me and my grandmother, standing outside the creaky wooden house in Crescent Valley, the house where I first fell in love with science, where Grandma once whispered, "You don't need permission to matter." I sat on the edge of the bed, opened my laptop and stared at the screen. For a moment, I hovered over my inbox. Then I opened a folder I hadn't touched in almost a year. Research, Oxidative Enzyme Trials, Original. Dozens of files stared back at me. Drafts, diagrams, timelines, every time-stamped note I'd created over 3 grueling years. My research, my work, the same work my brother Lucas had presented as his own. It all happened at the Caltech Molecular Science Conference. I was never good at public speaking, so I let Lucas present. We agreed. I'd do the analysis, he'd deliver the words. But when he took the stage, my name had vanished. Slide after slide. Lucas Hart, lead researcher. I turned to my dad in the audience, ready to speak, but he just smiled. "Lucas is finally stepping up," he whispered. "You could learn from him." I didn't respond. I swallowed my pride and my pain. Until now. That morning in the motel, I realized I had all the proof. The metadata, the handwriting, the original drafts. I hadn't lost my work. I had simply allowed them to take the story from my hands. Not anymore. I closed the folder, took a deep breath. If they erased my name, I would write it again. But this time, at the top. Starting over wasn't a plan. It was survival. Elliot helped me move into a small studio apartment on the edge of Hollow Creek, not far from the old public library. The walls were chipped, the heater barely worked, and the bathroom light buzzed like a dying insect. But there was a desk, 2 foldable beds, and just enough space to breathe. We bought a second-hand mini-fridge, borrowed a microwave from the upstairs neighbor, and propped up my laptop on a stack of dusty textbooks I once used in grad school. Elliot called it our research bunker. I called it Step 1. That night, over boxed noodles and 2 cups of strawberry ice cream, I looked at him and asked, "What do you think of the name Leora Labs?" He raised an eyebrow. "Leora sounds soft, almost like light." I smiled. "That's what it means, in Hebrew. I used to imagine naming a daughter that one day, but maybe it should be the name of a company first." He didn't laugh, he just nodded. 2 hours later, I registered leoralabs.com and submitted an LLC application using the last of my savings. No funding, no formal lab, just 1 laptop, a printer balanced on a cardboard box, and a purpose. I went back to my research. The original study on enzyme behavior in pregnant individuals and early detection of oxidative stress markers. A field overlooked by major institutions because it wasn't profitable enough. But I wasn't building Leora Labs for profit. I was building it for every woman who'd ever been told her data didn't matter, for every pregnant patient dismissed by the system, for every version of me still out there, alone in a motel bathroom, holding a test and wondering what comes next. I set up base at the Hollow Creek Public Library, free Wi-Fi, a working outlet, and a quiet table under the skylight. I spent hours reteaching myself grant writing, startup applications, and how to pitch without credentials. Late at night, I'd stop by Elliot's workroom to use his old office printer. He didn't say much, just handed back pages with pencil scribbles. Focus on outcome impact. Cut the intro. Go straight to the pain point. I listened. I learned. I adjusted. A week later, I submitted an application to a women-led biotech accelerator in San Francisco. The odds were slim. Hundreds applied. But I didn't need a miracle. I just needed 1 person to believe. And if that didn't happen, then I'd be the first. The San Francisco Women's Startup Accelerator was housed in a building made of glass and ambition. You could tell who belonged the moment they stepped in. Perfectly cut blazers, sleek laptops, a practiced confidence that didn't flinch. I walked in wearing a gray blazer that used to belong to Elliot's cousin, over a black maternity dress that hugged a belly I no longer bothered to hide. At 7 weeks, I was still early, but my body had started to show. I didn't try to conceal it. Let the numbers speak louder than the bump. That day was called Investor Speed Pitch. Each founder had 5 minutes to pitch to 3 different investors at 3 separate tables. A battlefield of time and first impressions. The first investor was a woman named Lena, maybe early 40s, silver blonde hair in a tight bun, and eyes that didn't blink much. She listened, asked real questions, pushed back in the right places. I walked away with my breath still even. The second table was different. A man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and gold-rimmed glasses interrupted me 3 minutes in. "If your tech is so viable, why don't you have any backing from a university?" I held his gaze. "Because I once let someone else take credit for my work. I'm rebuilding it now, under my name." He didn't respond, just scribbled something on a notepad. Then came the third table. Charles Hinton, mid-50s, expensive blazer, scrolling through his phone until I said the first word. I gave the pitch as cleanly as possible. Enzyme activation rates, prototype scalability, cost-cutting metrics. No fluff, just science. Halfway through, he raised a hand. "How old are you?" I blinked. 34? He nodded slowly. "And you're pregnant." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation dressed as curiosity. I didn't flinch. "With twins," I said. He leaned back. "No major funders, no lab, single mother. And you believe you can run a biotech company?" The silence around us was deafening. No one reacted. No one interrupted. I looked him straight in the eye. "I don't believe. I know. And I'm not alone." He raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Meaning I represent the millions of women overlooked by the system. They deserve better. I carry their voices with me. Whether you invest or not, this work will exist. He smirked. Investing isn't charity. I smiled back. Neither is surviving in a world that doubts you just for being born a woman. And I stood up, collected my files, and walked away. I didn't need his money. I just needed him to know I was never asking for permission. The California Women's Health Biotech Conference was held in the kind of hotel where the chandeliers looked like upside-down galaxies, gold-rimmed name tags, crisp programs, and velvet lanyards. I wasn't sure if I belonged, but I knew I had something to say. 3 days before the event, I received a last-minute email. A speaker had canceled. Would I be interested in filling the slot? I replied in 15 minutes, attached my slides in 20, but nothing prepared me for what I saw when I walked into the main lobby. A 10-foot banner stood by the entrance. At the center, my sister Selena Hart, wearing a white lab coat, hands gently folded, gaze downcast, like she was channeling wisdom from the stars. Below her, Imperia Foundation, leading innovation in women's health. And at the bottom, in elegant serif font, a quote, "Every cell carries a new opportunity. We just have to listen." I stopped breathing. I had written that line. During my 3rd year of graduate school, it was the opening sentence of the very first grant proposal I'd ever submitted, for the research she had stolen. She had taken not just my words, but my voice. And now she was about to present it as the keynote speaker. I was slotted right before her. When they called my name, I stepped onto the stage. No podium. Just me, a wireless mic, and a room full of people who didn't know me, yet. I skipped the introduction. My first slide was a chart comparing testing costs between traditional models and the enzyme-based prototype from Leora Labs. Second slide, data from 3 community clinics in rural California, real numbers, real impact. Third slide, a scan of enzyme reactivity patterns in pregnant patients overlooked by most clinical trials. Then I turned off the screen. "I know I don't have a foundation named after me," I said, voice steady. "No glossy brochures, no celebrity backers. What I do have is the truth." Murmurs shifted into silence. I once lived in a family where my voice was considered noise, where my work was erased and replaced, where being a woman in science meant being reminded, constantly, that I was too much and never enough. I took a breath. If you've come here today feeling inspired by the Imperia Foundation's slogans, you should know that story didn't start with their founder. It started with a girl who got kicked out of her home for refusing to stay silent. From the corner of the room, Clara stepped inside, clutching her printed speech. Her eyes met mine, and froze. "I don't have a sister," I said, gaze locked. "No one speaks for me. No one gets to wear my work like a borrowed coat." The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was truth hitting a room full of people who were finally listening. 2 days after the conference, I found a plain white envelope slipped under my apartment door. No stamp, no name, just silence pressed into paper. Inside was a formal legal notice. Defamation of character and intentional damage to organizational reputation, filed on behalf of Selena Hart and the Imperia Foundation. There it was. No phone call, no conversation, just cold ink and a threat. The letter demanded I retract my statements from the conference, issue a public apology, and remove any recorded footage of my presentation, or face civil litigation under California statute. I set the paper on the kitchen table. Elliot, drying dishes near the sink, caught the shift in my posture. "They sent it?" he asked. I nodded. She finally responded, "With lawyers." He walked over and stood beside me. I didn't tremble. I didn't panic, because the truth is, I'd been waiting for this moment. I opened my laptop and clicked on a folder I had created months ago. Case S. Hart. Inside were layers of evidence. A photo of the handwritten draft from 2019 captured with a beat-up Nokia phone, time-stamped months before Imperia Foundation even existed. The first Word document of the proposal with metadata showing me, Selena Hart, as the original author. An audio clip, Clara on the phone with her best friend, laughing. Honestly, she doesn't even realize I copied the whole file. I just tweaked the formatting. A lab notebook page from grad school, coffee-stained, sketching the exact enzyme pathways Imperia later used in its logo pitch. A forwarded email from a Stanford professor who'd thanked me, through Clara's address, for the brilliant theory I never submitted. I brought the entire archive to Renee Marshall, a civil rights attorney known for winning a major case against a biotech firm that had stolen a female researcher's work. She reviewed everything quietly, then looked up. "This isn't just defense," she said. "This is grounds for a counterclaim, intellectual property theft, academic plagiarism, and brand misrepresentation." I met her gaze. "Then let's do it. Not for revenge, for clarity, for what's mine," she smiled. "Then buckle up, because they think this is a scare tactic, but you've got firepower they don't expect." Receipts and resolve. 1 month later, I received a court summons. Filed under Sonoma County District Court. Plaintiff, Clara Hart and Imperia Foundation defendant and counterclaimant, Selena Hart. Charges, defamation, and in return, intellectual property theft, misuse of research data, and plagiarism. I didn't feel fear. I felt ready, not for a fight, but for the truth to finally stand in its rightful place. The morning of the hearing, I arrived at the Sonoma County Courthouse before sunrise. The halls smelled faintly of wood polish and ink. I wasn't nervous. I was sharp, focused, worn into steel from every scar they thought would break me. Clara arrived 15 minutes later, flanked by 2 lawyers, dressed in cream silk, hair in a perfect bun, clutching a structured handbag like it could protect her from the truth. She smiled at me as if we were just 2 sisters having a disagreement over tea. But this wasn't tea. This was war. And I had brought my receipts. My attorney, Renee, began with no embellishment. "Your Honor, this is not a family matter. This is a calculated extraction of intellectual property committed under the shield of familiarity and trust. We have documents, audio, and metadata proving that the core ideas, language, and even branding of the Imperia Foundation were built on the defendant's original work." Clara's team fired back quickly, calling the claims an overlap of scientific theory and insisting Selena had no formal role or rights. I stood. "Permission to speak?" The judge, a silver-haired woman with a sharp jaw and kind eyes, nodded. I walked forward and placed a USB on the evidence table. Inside, every file Renee had reviewed, every timestamp, every handwritten note. And finally, 1 voice memo, Clara's voice recorded the night she borrowed my laptop. "Honestly, Selena doesn't even know I took it. She's too soft to call it out anyway." The courtroom went still. Then I turned and faced Clara, calm, unblinking. "You can steal a logo. You can repeat a quote. You can rewrite my story in your tone. But what you can't steal is the part you never lived. The late nights in freezing labs, the hours of research, the fear of failing alone. That was mine. That will always be mine." The judge tapped her gavel gently. "After reviewing the evidence, this court declares Selena Hart the lawful originator of the research materials and concepts in question. The Imperia Foundation is found in violation of intellectual property standards and must cease use of said material immediately. A public correction will be issued within 30 days. Clara didn't look at me again. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She just sat, like her name had just been emptied. I didn't walk out smiling. I walked out free. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. My name, Selena Hart, had been restored to where it always belonged. At the top of the work, they once tried to bury. That summer, Hollow Creek was dry and dusty, but the garden behind our little rented home was alive. Elliot built a small greenhouse from salvaged wood and old window panes. Inside, we grew medicinal herbs, lavender, turmeric, ginger, all part of a new enzyme-based treatment I was developing to support early-stage ovarian health. This time, the research was ours. The credit? Mine. Leora Labs had no glossy headquarters, no viral press release, but in a quiet lab corner at Santa Rosa Tech, where I once interned as a student, I ran trials again. They gave me free access for 3 months in exchange for community data. I accepted without hesitation. A nonprofit from San Diego offered our first $45,000 seed grant. Their only condition? Build something for the women who've been forgotten. So I did. We developed compact testing kits, enzyme-responsive, portable, low-cost. With the help of mobile clinics, we reached over 300 women in under 60 days. No one asked for titles, no one needed approval. The results spoke louder than credentials ever could. Then the twins came. Born on a rainy October night, I named them Nova and Reed, symbols of light and resilience. Elliot held my hand through the entire labor. We didn't throw a party, just shared strawberry cake with 2 close friends. On top of the card, our landlady had written, "To the woman who never needed permission, and her 2 little stars." 1 month later, a research institute in Oregon reached out, requesting collaboration. We flew north, me, Elliot, and the twins. It was the first time I stepped into a room full of experts and didn't feel small. I presented the work. My name was on every slide. No one blinked. Because now, I didn't ask to belong. I walked in knowing I did. If this story moved you, if you've ever been underestimated, pushed aside, or told to be quiet, leave a comment below. Tell us what part of Selena's journey speaks to you. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more powerful, honest stories that prove real worth doesn't ask to be seen, it chooses to shine.